The autumn rain falls steadily against the tall windows of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel in downtown Chicago. It's October 15th, 1987, and the lobby buzzes with the quiet energy of evening check-ins. Business travelers clutch their leather briefcases, couples whisper plans for dinner, and the soft notes of a piano drift from the hotel bar, where a young woman plays background music that no one seems to notice. Billy Joel pushes through the revolving door, his dark hair slightly damp from the rain, carrying a worn leather satchel and moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who has traveled countless miles. He's between tour dates, seeking nothing more than a quiet room and perhaps a decent meal before tomorrow's drive to Milwaukee. The lobby's marble floors reflect the warm amber light from crystal chandeliers, creating an atmosphere of understated elegance that speaks of better times, when hotels like this were destinations in themselves. At the front desk stands Margaret Chen, a woman in her late 50s whose silver-streaked hair is pulled back into a neat bun. Her navy blazer shows the careful attention of someone who takes pride in her appearance despite modest means. She moves with quiet efficiency, checking guests in with genuine warmth, remembering names and preferences with the kind of personal touch that seems increasingly rare in a world growing more impersonal by the day. Behind her, partially hidden by a marble pillar, Robert Sterling adjusts his expensive tie and watches the lobby with the calculating gaze of someone who sees people as numbers on a balance sheet. At 38, Sterling has climbed the corporate ladder of hotel management by cutting costs and maximizing profits, viewing hospitality as a business transaction rather than an art of human connection. His corner office overlooks Lake Michigan, but he rarely looks up from his spreadsheets long enough to appreciate the view. Billy approaches the front desk, and Margaret looks up with the kind of smile that reaches her eyes. There's something immediately warm about her presence, a genuine interest in the person standing before her rather than just another transaction to process. "Good evening, sir. How may I help you tonight?" "I'd like a room for the night, please. Something quiet if you have it." Margaret's fingers dance across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, but her eyes remain focused on Billy, reading the subtle signs of weariness that come from life on the road. "Of course. We have a lovely room on the 15th floor, corner suite with a view of the lake. It's one of our finest, and tonight it's available at our standard rate." Billy raises an eyebrow, surprised by the unexpected upgrade. "That's very kind of you, but I'm sure the standard rate for a corner suite is more than—" "The standard rate," Margaret interrupts gently, "is what we charge for a good night's sleep and genuine hospitality. Everything else is just details." As she processes his registration, Margaret notices the calluses on Billy's fingers, the kind that come from years of playing piano. There's something familiar about his face, a recognition that hovers just beyond conscious thought, like a song heard in childhood that you can't quite name but somehow know by heart. From across the lobby, Robert Sterling has been watching this interaction with growing irritation. He strides over with the purposeful gait of a man accustomed to being obeyed, his expression already hardening into the mask of corporate displeasure. "Mrs. Chen, might I have a word with you privately?" Margaret's smile falters slightly, but she maintains her professional composure. "Mr. Sterling, I'm just finishing with this gentleman's check-in. That's exactly what I want to discuss. Excuse us for just a moment, sir." Billy steps back slightly, sensing the tension but not wanting to cause problems for the kind woman who had just shown him such unexpected courtesy. He watches as Sterling leads Margaret a few steps away, his voice low but his displeasure unmistakable. "Mrs. Chen, I've reviewed our occupancy rates and revenue projections for this quarter. We simply cannot afford to be giving away our premium suites at discounted rates, regardless of how slow the evening might be." Margaret's voice remains calm, but there's a strength beneath it that speaks of years spent standing up for what she believes is right. "Mr. Sterling, the gentleman appears to be a musician, and musicians often travel on tight budgets. A little kindness costs us nothing, and kindness doesn't pay our mortgage, Mrs. Chen. Our investors expect maximum return on every square foot of this property. I've been quite clear about this in our staff meetings. Billy, overhearing enough to understand the situation, steps forward with a gentle smile. "Excuse me, I don't want to cause any trouble. Perhaps I could just take a standard room." Sterling turns to Billy with the practiced smile of corporate hospitality, but there's no warmth behind it. "I appreciate your understanding, Mr. Joel." Billy Joel. For a moment, the name hangs in the air. Margaret's eyes widen with recognition, while Sterling's expression shifts to one of calculated assessment. In 1987, Billy Joel is at the height of his fame, with albums like The Stranger and 52nd Street, having established him as one of America's premier singer-songwriters. But Sterling sees only dollar signs and potential liability. "Mr. Joel, I'm sure you understand that we have policies in place for all our guests, regardless of status. Our standard rooms are quite comfortable, and I'm certain they'll meet your needs adequately." There's something dismissive in Sterling's tone, a subtle condescension that suggests he views Billy not as a world-renowned artist, but as someone trying to leverage celebrity for special treatment. Margaret watches this interaction with growing distress, understanding that her gesture of kindness has somehow become a point of corporate policy enforcement. Billy nods slowly, his expression remaining pleasant despite the obvious slight. Of course, a standard room will be fine. As Margaret reluctantly processes the change, reducing Billy's accommodation to a basic room on the third floor, she feels a profound sense of disappointment, not just in her manager's inflexibility, but in what this moment represents, the triumph of cold business calculation over human warmth and recognition of artistry. The transaction completed, Billy takes his keycard and thanks Margaret with genuine gratitude, despite the awkwardness of the situation. As he walks toward the elevators, carrying his simple leather bag, Sterling returns to his office with the satisfied air of a man who has successfully defended the bottom line. But Margaret remains at the front desk, troubled by what has just transpired. She has worked in hospitality for over 30 years, beginning as a housekeeper and working her way up through dedication and genuine care for the people who trust her with their comfort. She has always believed that hotels, at their best, are places where strangers become guests, and guests are treated like family. The elevator doors close behind Billy, and Margaret returns to her duties, but her heart isn't in it. She processes the next few check-ins mechanically, her mind replaying the uncomfortable scene with Mr. Sterling and wondering what happened to the industry she once loved. An hour passes, and the lobby begins to quiet as evening settles into night. The young woman at the piano in the bar plays a soft rendition of "The Way You Look Tonight," her fingers finding the melody with the kind of natural grace that suggests deep musical training. A few guests sit at nearby tables, some listening, others lost in conversation or their own thoughts. Billy, having settled into his room and found it perfectly adequate despite Sterling's dismissive attitude, decides to venture downstairs for a drink. The day has been long, and tomorrow's drive to Milwaukee stretches ahead of him like an empty highway. Sometimes the road between performances feels longer than the shows themselves. He enters the hotel bar, a dimly lit space with rich mahogany paneling and brass fixtures that speak of an earlier era when hotel bars were gathering places for travelers with stories to tell. The pianist, a young woman in her early 20s with auburn hair that catches the lamplight, doesn't notice him enter. She's lost in the music, her interpretation of the standard showing both technical skill and emotional depth that goes far beyond background entertainment. Billy takes a seat at a corner table where he can listen without drawing attention to himself. The pianist's touch reminds him of his own early days, playing in piano bars and small venues, learning to read a room and understand that sometimes music serves as a bridge between strangers who might otherwise never connect. As the song ends, a few guests offer polite applause, but most continue their conversations as if the music were merely sonic wallpaper. Billy watches the young woman's face and sees a flicker of disappointment, quickly masked by professional composure. She begins another song, this time Autumn Leaves, and Billy closes his eyes to listen more carefully. There's something special here, he realizes. This isn't just competent hotel lounge playing. There's a sophistication to her harmonic choices, a subtle reinterpretation of familiar melodies that suggests formal training and natural talent. But more than technical skill, there's emotion in her playing, a wistfulness that speaks of dreams deferred and hopes held carefully in reserve. Margaret Chen appears in the doorway of the bar. Having finished her shift at the front desk, she surveys the quiet scene with the practiced eye of someone who has spent decades in hospitality, noting which guests seem content, which might need attention, and how the overall atmosphere feels. Her gaze settles on Billy, sitting alone at his corner table, and she feels again the sting of her earlier embarrassment. She approaches his table with some hesitation, unsure whether her presence will be welcome after the awkward scene at check-in. "Mr. Joel, I wanted to apologize for earlier. Mr. Sterling's policies, well, they don't always align with what I believe hospitality should be." Billy looks up and gestures to the empty chair across from him. "Please, sit down. And please, call me Billy. There's no need to apologize. You were trying to be kind, and I appreciate that more than you know." Margaret sits, her posture relaxing slightly as she realizes Billy holds no grudge against her. "I've been in this business for 30 years, and I've seen it change so much. There was a time when hotels were about creating experiences, making people feel special. Now everything is about efficiency and profit margins." "Change isn't always progress," Billy agrees, his eyes drifting toward the pianist. "Like what she's doing over there. That's not just background music, that's artistry. But I bet most people don't even hear it." Margaret follows his gaze. "That's Sarah Martinez. She's been playing here for about 6 months. Wonderful girl, classically trained, but..." She pauses, choosing her words carefully. "Let's just say Mr. Sterling doesn't see much value in what he calls unnecessary musical flourishes." "Do." As if summoned by their conversation, Robert Sterling appears in the bar entrance, his expression immediately darkening as he notices Margaret sitting with a guest. His approach is swift and purposeful, and both Billy and Margaret can sense his displeasure before he reaches their table. "Mrs. Chen, your shift ended 20 minutes ago. I'm sure Mr. Joel doesn't need to be bothered by staff during his leisure time." There's a sharp edge to Sterling's voice, and Billy recognizes the tone of a man exercising authority for its own sake rather than for any practical purpose. Margaret begins to rise, her cheeks coloring with embarrassment, but Billy speaks before she can excuse herself. "Actually, Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Chen and I were having a pleasant conversation about the hotel's history. She's been incredibly helpful, and I'd be delighted if she could stay and finish telling me about some of the notable guests who have stayed here over the years." Sterling's jaw tightens. He's caught between his desire to assert managerial authority and the recognition that antagonizing a celebrity guest could have negative consequences for the hotel. "Of course, Mr. Joel. I just wanted to ensure you weren't being imposed upon." "Not at all. In fact, Mrs. Chen's knowledge of the hospitality industry has been fascinating. I'm always interested in learning from people who've dedicated their careers to making others feel welcome." The compliment is delivered with apparent sincerity, but there's an underlying message that Sterling recognizes. Billy is drawing a deliberate contrast between Margaret's approach to hospitality and the manager's own corporate rigidity. Sterling forces a smile and nods curtly before retreating to the bar, where he takes a seat with clear sightlines to their table. Margaret looks uncomfortable with the attention, but Billy leans forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Don't let him intimidate you. People like you are what make the difference between a building with beds and a place where people want to stay." Their conversation is interrupted by a subtle shift in the music. Sarah has transitioned from standards to something more original, her fingers finding a melody that seems to emerge from some deeply personal place. The harmonic progression is sophisticated, the phrasing natural and unforced, and the emotional content unmistakable. Billy's attention sharpens. This isn't a cover song or a standard. This is original composition, and it's remarkably good. He listens more intently, his trained ear picking up the subtle complexities of Sarah's harmonic language and the way she develops melodic themes with the confidence of someone who truly understands musical storytelling. She writes her own music, he asks Margaret quietly. I believe so, though Mr. Sterling has made it clear that guests prefer familiar songs. He's told her to stick to standards and popular covers. Billy watches Sarah play, seeing in her focused concentration the same intensity he remembers from his own early days, when every performance felt like an opportunity to share something essential about human experience through music. But he also sees the way she glances occasionally toward the bar entrance, aware of Sterling's presence and the restrictions placed on her artistic expression. As Sarah's original piece draws to a close, there's a moment of perfect silence in the bar. Even the conversing guests seem to have paused, touched by something they can't quite name, but instinctively recognize as genuine artistry. Then the usual sounds resume, clinking glasses, quiet laughter, the rustle of newspapers, and Sarah transitions into a safe rendition of Misty. Billy makes a decision that surprises even himself. He stands and walks to the piano, his movement causing a slight stir among the guests who recognize him. Sarah looks up with surprise and a touch of nervousness as he approaches. "That last song," he says quietly, "was that yours?" Sarah nods, her cheeks coloring slightly. "I'm sorry. I know I'm supposed to stick to the standard repertoire, but sometimes don't apologize. That was beautiful, really beautiful. Would you mind if I listened to a few more of your originals?" From across the bar, Sterling has risen from his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the interaction taking place at the piano. But the other guests have begun to take notice, and some have moved closer, curious about the conversation between the famous musician and their regular pianist. Sarah glances nervously toward Sterling, then back to Billy. I have about 15 minutes left in my set. I usually end with something quiet and familiar. What would you play if you could play anything?" The question hangs in the air, and Sarah considers it with the careful thought of someone who has spent many nights dreaming of such an opportunity. Her fingers find the keys tentatively, beginning a melody that starts simply but quickly reveals itself to be something much more complex and emotionally resonant. Billy recognizes immediately that Sarah possesses not just technical skill, but that rarer quality, the ability to translate genuine emotion into musical language that speaks directly to the human heart. Her original composition unfolds with the kind of natural musical logic that can't be taught, only nurtured and developed through years of dedicated practice and deep listening. As Sarah plays, Margaret watches from their table with growing amazement. She has heard Sarah perform dozens of times, but always within the constraints of Sterling's commercial requirements. Now, given permission to express herself freely, Sarah's true abilities emerge like sunlight breaking through clouds. The other guests in the bar have grown quiet, drawn into the spell of Sarah's music despite themselves. This is no longer background entertainment, but something approaching a concert performance, and the intimate setting makes it feel like a private revelation shared among strangers who have stumbled upon something unexpected and precious. But Sterling's patience has reached its limit. He strides across the bar with determined steps, his expression set in lines of managerial disapproval. He reaches the piano just as Sarah's piece reaches a particularly beautiful passage, and his interruption feels like vandalism. "Miss Martinez, I believe we discussed appropriate repertoire for the hotel bar. Our guests expect familiar music, not..." He searches for words that will express his displeasure without directly insulting Billy's obvious appreciation for Sarah's work. Not experimental pieces that might disturb their relaxation. Sarah's hands freeze above the keys, her face flushing with embarrassment and disappointment. The magical atmosphere that had been building in the bar dissipates instantly, replaced by the uncomfortable tension of artistic expression being crushed by bureaucratic authority. Billy looks at Sterling with an expression that remains pleasant, but has acquired a subtle steel beneath its surface. "I'm afraid I disagree, Mr. Sterling. Miss Martinez's original work is extraordinary. In fact, I'd be very interested in hearing more of her compositions. Mr. Joel, I appreciate your enthusiasm for music, but this is a business establishment, not a concert hall. We have standards to maintain and guest expectations to meet." "And what exactly do you think those standards are?" The question is asked with genuine curiosity, but there's an edge to it that makes Sterling realize he's stepped into deeper waters than he intended. Around them, the other guests watch this exchange with growing interest, sensing they're witnessing something more significant than a simple disagreement about hotel entertainment policy. Our guests expect professional service and appropriate atmosphere. They come here to relax and conduct business, not to be subjected to amateur musical experimentation. The word amateur hangs in the air like an insult, and Sarah's face shows the pain of having her artistic efforts so casually dismissed. Billy's expression doesn't change, but something shifts in his posture that suggests Sterling has crossed a line that perhaps should have remained uncrossed. "Mr. Sterling, I've performed in venues all over the world, from Madison Square Garden to small clubs in Long Island. I can tell you with absolute certainty that Miss Martinez possesses the kind of musical talent that most conservatories would kill to develop. What she just played showed more genuine artistry than many performers with recording contracts will ever achieve." Sterling realizes he has made a tactical error in dismissing Sarah's abilities so cavalierly in front of someone whose musical credibility is beyond question. But rather than backing down, he doubles down on his position with the stubborn pride of a man whose authority has been challenged in public. "Mr. Joel, I respect your expertise, but I have a hotel to run. Our entertainment must serve the needs of all our guests, not just those with specialized musical interests." Billy nods slowly, as if considering Sterling's position with careful thought. Then he turns to Sarah, who has been sitting frozen at the piano bench, caught between her desire to continue playing and her need to keep her job. "Sarah, would you mind if I played something? Just one song?" Sarah slides over on the bench to make room, and Billy settles beside her at the piano. His fingers find the keys with the casual confidence of someone who has spent thousands of hours making music, and he begins to play Piano Man with a gentle, intimate arrangement that transforms the familiar song into something almost conversational. But he sings only the first verse and chorus before stopping and looking directly at Sterling. "You know, I wrote this song about a piano bar in Los Angeles where I played early in my career. It was a place where music created connections between people who might otherwise never have spoken to each other. The owner understood that sometimes a song can change someone's entire evening, maybe even their life." He turns back to the piano and begins playing again, but this time he nods to Sarah, inviting her to join him. Her hands find the higher register, and together they create a delicate interweaving of melody that demonstrates not just their individual skills, but their ability to listen to each other and create something greater than the sum of its parts. The other guests in the bar have now gathered closer to the piano, drawn by the rare spectacle of a world-famous musician performing intimately in their hotel bar. But more than celebrity fascination, there's genuine appreciation for the music itself. The way Billy and Sarah's collaborative playing creates an atmosphere of warmth and connection that transforms the sterile hotel bar into something approaching a musical sanctuary. Margaret watches from her table with tears in her eyes, seeing in this moment everything she believes hospitality should be, the creation of unexpected joy and human connection through genuine care and attention to what matters most in people's lives. But Sterling sees only the disruption of established order and the dangerous precedent of guests making demands that contradict hotel policy. As the song ends and the gathered guests burst into enthusiastic applause, he steps forward with renewed determination. "Mr. Joel, while I appreciate this impromptu performance, I must insist that we return to our regular programming. Miss Martinez has specific duties to fulfill, and we can't have our entertainment policy determined by individual guest preferences, regardless of their celebrity status." The phrase "celebrity status" is delivered with just enough dismissive undertone to suggest that Sterling views Billy's fame as an irrelevant attempt to manipulate hotel policy rather than legitimate artistic credibility. This calculated slight does not go unnoticed by Billy, nor by the other guests who have been drawn into the evening's unexpected musical experience. Billy stands from the piano bench, his movement deliberate and controlled. When he speaks, his voice carries the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard and respected. But there's also a sadness that speaks to deeper disappointments with human nature. "Mr. Sterling, I understand you have policies to maintain, but I wonder if you understand what you're actually managing here. This hotel, this bar, these are places where people come when they're away from home, often feeling isolated and disconnected. Music like Sarah's has the power to remind them that beauty and artistry still exist in the world, that someone cares enough to share something meaningful with complete strangers." He pauses, looking around at the faces of guests who have been touched by the evening's music. "But you see it as a liability, something that might disrupt the smooth operation of your business model. And that tells me everything I need to know about the kind of place this has become." Billy turns to Sarah, who has been watching this exchange with growing distress, torn between her gratitude for his support and her fear of losing her job. "Sarah, thank you for sharing your music tonight. Don't let anyone convince you that what you do isn't valuable. The world needs more people willing to put beauty into it, not fewer." He walks back to Margaret's table, where she sits with a mixture of pride and apprehension, knowing that Sterling will not forgive this public challenge to his authority. "Mrs. Chen, thank you for the conversation and for trying to make a stranger feel welcome. That's becoming a rare gift." As Billy heads toward the exit, Sterling's voice stops him. "Mr. Joel, I hope you understand that I'm simply trying to maintain standards that serve all our guests, not just..." Billy turns back, and for the first time all evening, his expression shows genuine emotion rather than careful politeness. "Mr. Sterling, I've stayed in hundreds of hotels around the world. Some had marble lobbies and crystal chandeliers. Others were simple places with clean sheets and friendly staff, but the ones I remember, the ones that felt like more than just buildings with beds, were the places where someone cared enough to make guests feel like human beings rather than revenue sources." He looks around the bar one more time, his gaze taking in Sarah still seated at the piano, Margaret watching anxiously from her table, and the other guests who seem reluctant to see this unexpected evening of music come to an end. This could be one of those places. You have people here who understand hospitality as more than transaction processing, but that would require you to value things that don't show up immediately on your quarterly reports. Billy leaves the bar, and the room falls into an uncomfortable silence. Sterling looks around at faces that reflect various degrees of disappointment and disapproval, realizing that his attempt to maintain control has instead exposed him to criticism from both staff and guests. Sarah sits at the piano, uncertain whether to continue playing or pack up her music. The evening's events have revealed possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine, but also highlighted the constraints that limit her artistic expression in this environment. Margaret remains at her table, knowing that her sympathetic conversation with Billy has likely cost her whatever small measure of job security she possessed. At 57, With limited savings and few employment alternatives, the prospect of losing her position at the hotel fills her with genuine fear. But Sterling's immediate concern is damage control. He approaches Sarah with a forced smile, attempting to project managerial reasonableness rather than the authoritarian control that has just been publicly challenged. Miss Martinez, I hope you understand that nothing personal was intended. We simply must maintain consistency in our entertainment offerings. Sarah nods without speaking, her hands moving mechanically as she organizes her sheet music. The excitement of performing her original compositions and receiving validation from a musician of Billy Joel's caliber has been replaced by the familiar weight of creative compromise and financial necessity. Sterling next approaches Margaret, who has begun gathering her things to leave. Mrs. Chen, I trust this evening's irregularities won't affect your understanding of appropriate guest relations going forward. Margaret meets his gaze directly. Mr. Sterling, I've been in hospitality longer than you've been alive. I know the difference between appropriate guest relations and treating people with basic human dignity. The response surprises Sterling with its quiet firmness. Margaret has always been a model employee, reliable, competent, and deferential to management authority. This subtle defiance suggests that the evening's events have shifted something fundamental in the hotel's internal dynamics. As the bar begins to empty, Sterling retreats to his office to consider the implications of what has just occurred. Billy Joel's public criticism of hotel policies, witnessed by multiple guests, represents exactly the kind of negative publicity that could damage the hotel's reputation and, more importantly, affect occupancy rates and revenue. But deeper than his concern about potential publicity problems is Sterling's uncomfortable realization that his authority has been openly questioned and found wanting by people whose opinions might matter to his corporate superiors. The evening has exposed the limitations of management by policy enforcement and revealed the tension between hospitality as customer service and hospitality as human art. Upstairs in his room, Billy sits by the window looking out at Lake Michigan, where the city lights reflect on the dark water like scattered stars. The encounter in the bar has left him with mixed feelings, frustration at Sterling's narrow-minded rigidity, but also recognition of something valuable in people like Margaret and Sarah, who continue to believe that their work can be more than just economic transaction. He thinks about the countless hotels where he's stayed during years of touring, and how rarely he encounters genuine hospitality rather than professional efficiency. The difference isn't in amenities or luxury, but in the recognition that travelers are people with stories, dreams, and needs that go beyond clean sheets and prompt room service. Sarah's music continues to play in his memory, and he finds himself humming the melody she had improvised during their brief collaboration. There was something in her harmonic choices that reminded him of his own early songwriting. The discovery that music could capture emotions too complex for words and share them with complete strangers. He makes a decision that surprises him with its spontaneity. Taking out hotel stationery, he begins to write a letter to Sarah, not as Billy Joel, the celebrity, but as one musician to another who understands the importance of persisting in the face of discouragement. Dear Sarah, he writes, thank you for sharing your music tonight. In a world that often values conformity over creativity, your willingness to express something genuine and personal is both brave and necessary. Don't let anyone convince you that beauty is impractical or that artistry is amateur. The world has enough competent piano players. It needs more people like you who understand that music can be a bridge between strangers and a reminder that we're all in this together. Meanwhile, in her small apartment 20 minutes from the hotel, Sarah sits at her electronic keyboard, replaying the evening's events in her mind. Billy Joel's encouragement feels like a door opening to possibilities she had almost given up imagining, but Sterling's disapproval reminds her of the practical realities that constrain her artistic ambitions. She plays through some of her original compositions, hearing them now with the memory of Billy's appreciation and recognition. For a few minutes in the hotel bar, her music had created exactly the kind of connection she had always hoped art could achieve. Strangers brought together by shared recognition of something beautiful and meaningful. But tomorrow, she will return to playing background music for guests who rarely listen, constrained by policies that reduce music to ambient sound rather than recognizing its potential to transform ordinary experiences into memorable ones. Margaret Chen lies awake in her own small apartment, staring at the ceiling and wondering whether her 30-year career in hospitality is about to come to an end. Sterling's displeasure was unmistakable, and her age makes finding comparable employment increasingly unlikely, but she also feels something she hasn't experienced in years: pride in having stood up for what she believes hospitality should be. Her conversation with Billy Joel had reminded her why she entered this business in the first place. The satisfaction of making strangers feel welcomed and valued during moments when they're far from home and familiar comforts. The next morning arrives gray and drizzly, with Lake Michigan disappearing into low clouds that mirror the subdued atmosphere in the hotel lobby. Margaret arrives for her shift to find an envelope waiting for her at the front desk, marked with her name in careful handwriting. Inside, she finds a brief note from Billy Joel, thanking her for her kindness and including something that takes her breath away: a check for $5,000, with a note explaining that it's intended to provide her with some financial security in case her principals ever cost her a job, because the world needs more people willing to treat strangers with genuine care and respect. Sarah arrives for her evening shift at the bar to find a similar envelope, containing not just a generous check, but also the contact information for Billy's music publisher and a personal recommendation letter praising her compositional abilities and suggesting that her talents deserve wider recognition and professional opportunity. But the most significant envelope waits on Robert Sterling's desk when he arrives at the hotel that morning. It contains a letter from the hotel's corporate ownership, responding to a late-night phone call they had received from Billy Joel the previous evening. The letter is polite, but firm in its message. The corporate owners have built their reputation on providing hospitality that goes beyond basic accommodation to create memorable experiences for guests. They are concerned by reports that current management policies may be prioritizing cost control over the kind of service excellence that distinguishes their properties from generic chain hotels. The letter requests a detailed report on the incident involving Mr. Joel, along with Sterling's recommendations for ensuring that future guest interactions reflect the company's commitment to exceptional hospitality rather than rigid policy enforcement. Sterling reads the letter twice, recognizing it as a career-threatening development that requires immediate damage control. His first impulse is to blame subordinate staff for the previous evening's problems, but he realizes that the corporate owners are specifically questioning his own judgment and management philosophy. The morning brings other consequences as well. Several guests who had witnessed the previous evening's events in the bar stopped by the front desk to express their appreciation for the unexpected musical experience and to ask whether similar performances might be scheduled in the future. Margaret handles these inquiries with professional grace, but she can see Sterling watching from across the lobby with growing discomfort. The positive guest feedback directly contradicts his assertion that customers prefer predictable background entertainment over artistic expression. By noon, Sterling realizes that his attempt to maintain control has instead created a situation that threatens his position and forces him to reconsider policies he had implemented without fully understanding their impact on guest satisfaction and employee morale. He approaches Margaret's desk during a quiet moment, his manner lacking its usual authoritarian confidence. "Mrs. Chen, I wanted to discuss last evening's events and ensure we're aligned on how to handle similar situations in the future." Margaret looks up from her work with an expression of polite attention that doesn't quite mask her wariness. "Of course, Mr. Sterling, how can I help you? I may have been overly rigid in my interpretation of our entertainment policies. Guest satisfaction is, of course, our primary concern, and if exceptional circumstances call for flexibility, the partial apology trails off as Sterling searches for words that will retreat from his previous position without appearing to admit fundamental error in judgment. Margaret recognizes his discomfort, but also understands that this conversation represents an opportunity to advocate for the kind of hospitality she believes the hotel should provide. "Mr. Sterling, I think what happened last evening showed that our guests appreciate authentic experiences over standardized service. Mr. Joel was responding to genuine artistry, not asking for special treatment. And the other guests were clearly moved by Miss Martinez's original compositions." Sterling nods reluctantly, recognizing that Margaret's interpretation aligns more closely with the corporate ownership's expectations than his own policy-focused approach. "Perhaps we could consider allowing Miss Martinez more creative freedom in her repertoire within reasonable bounds." The conversation continues for several more minutes, with Sterling gradually acknowledging that his understanding of guest preferences may have been incomplete, and that policies designed to ensure consistency might sometimes work against the goal of creating memorable experiences. Margaret emerges from this discussion with cautious optimism, sensing that the previous evening's confrontation may have opened possibilities for positive change rather than simply creating conflict. But she also understands that Sterling's newfound flexibility stems from corporate pressure rather than genuine philosophical evolution, making future improvements uncertain and potentially temporary. That evening, Sarah returns to her position at the piano with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Sterling has grudgingly authorized her to include original compositions in her repertoire, but she's unsure how to interpret this new freedom and whether it represents genuine support or merely damage control. She begins her set with familiar standards, but after a few songs, she makes the decision to play one of her original pieces, the same composition that had caught Billy Joel's attention the previous evening. The bar is busier tonight, with several guests who had witnessed the previous evening's events returning specifically to hear more of her music. As Sarah plays, she notices that the atmosphere in the bar feels different. Guests are listening more attentively, and several have moved closer to the piano, drawn by music that engages their emotions rather than simply providing background ambience. Margaret watches from the bar entrance during her break, seeing in Sarah's performance the kind of hospitality excellence that creates lasting memories rather than just satisfactory service. The young woman's music transforms the hotel bar from a generic commercial space into something approaching an intimate concert venue where strangers share in the appreciation of genuine artistry. But the most significant observer is Billy Joel himself, who has decided to extend his stay in Chicago by one night. He sits at the same corner table he had occupied the previous evening, listening to Sarah's performance with the attention of someone who understands both the technical skill and emotional courage required to share original compositions with an audience of strangers. When Sarah finishes her set, Billy approaches the piano with a warm smile. "I wanted to thank you for continuing to play your own music. It takes real courage to put something personal out into the world and trust that people will understand its value." Sarah's face lights up with gratitude and relief. "Mr. Joel, I can't thank you enough for what you did last night and for the letter and everything. It means more than you can possibly know. The music means more than you can possibly know. Don't ever stop writing, and don't ever stop believing that what you have to say is worth hearing." Their conversation is interrupted by Margaret, who approaches with something approaching maternal pride in her expression. "Sarah, that was absolutely beautiful. I've been listening to you play for months, but tonight felt different, more confident, more yourself." Billy turns to Margaret with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Chen, I hope you received my note this morning. I meant every word of it." Margaret's eyes moisten slightly as she nods. "It was incredibly generous, Mr. Joel. More than generous. But what meant the most was knowing that someone understood why I do this work. People like you are the reason hospitality is an art, rather than just an industry. You see guests as individuals with their own stories and needs, not just revenue opportunities." As the three of them stand together near the piano, Sterling approaches from across the bar. His manner is noticeably different from the previous evening, less authoritarian, more uncertain. The corporate letter had made clear that his job security depends on his ability to adapt his management style to better serve guest satisfaction. "Mr. Joel, I wanted to personally apologize for any misunderstanding last evening. I hope your extended stay has been more pleasant." Billy studies Sterling's face, looking for signs of genuine change versus mere damage control. "Mr. Sterling, I appreciate the apology, but I'm more interested in whether you've gained any new perspective on what makes a hotel truly special." Sterling glances around the bar, noting the engaged faces of guests who are lingering longer than usual, ordering additional drinks, and clearly enjoying the enhanced atmosphere created by Sarah's more expressive musical performances. "I'm beginning to understand that our guests value authentic experiences more highly than I had previously recognized. Miss Martinez's expanded repertoire seems to be creating positive responses. It's a careful, corporate-speak acknowledgement that doesn't fully commit to philosophical change, but suggests at least tactical flexibility." Billy recognizes the limitations of Sterling's evolution while also appreciating that even small steps toward valuing artistry over rigid policy enforcement represent progress. "Mr. Sterling, I've performed in venues where management understood that exceptional entertainment creates loyal customers who become advocates for the establishment. Those venues succeed because they recognize that people remember how a place made them feel, not just how efficiently it processed their transaction." The conversation continues for several more minutes, with Sterling gradually revealing more genuine curiosity about the business philosophy Billy is describing. Margaret and Sarah listen as two very different approaches to hospitality management are explored, one focused on cost control and policy consistency, the other on creating memorable human experiences. As the evening progresses, something unexpected develops in the hotel bar. Word has spread through informal guest networks that Billy Joel has been performing impromptu collaborations with the hotel pianist, and several music lovers have arrived hoping to witness similar magic. But rather than feeling pressured to perform, Billy finds himself genuinely enjoying the atmosphere Sarah has created. Her original compositions provide a sophisticated musical backdrop that encourages conversation and connection among strangers who might otherwise remain isolated in their separate business trips and personal travels. At one point during the evening, an elderly gentleman approaches the piano with hesitant steps. He introduces himself as Professor Emeritus James Hartford, a retired music theory professor from Northwestern University who has been staying at the hotel while visiting his hospitalized wife. "Miss Martinez," he says to Sarah, "I couldn't help but notice your harmonic language in that last composition. The way you resolved that secondary dominant in the bridge section showed remarkable sophistication. Where did you study?" Sarah's face brightens as she recognizes genuine musical understanding in Professor Hartford's question. "I studied at DePaul, but mostly I've been learning by listening and experimenting. Music theory sometimes feels like trying to explain why a sunset is beautiful, but I love understanding how the pieces fit together." Professor Hartford nods approvingly. "Music theory should illuminate intuition, not replace it. Your instincts for voice leading are quite remarkable. Have you considered pursuing graduate study?" Billy watches this interaction with growing interest, recognizing that Sarah's talent is attracting attention from serious musicians who understand the difference between competent performance and genuine artistry. Professor Hartford's validation represents the kind of professional recognition that could open doors Sarah hadn't dared to imagine. Professor Hartford, Billy interjects gently, Sarah is extraordinarily talented. Her compositions show the kind of natural musical logic that can't be taught, only nurtured. I hope she'll find opportunities to develop her abilities further. The professor's eyes widen as he recognizes Billy, but his focus remains on musical rather than celebrity matters. Mr. Joel, I'm familiar with your work, of course. Your harmonic vocabulary has always impressed me, particularly in songs like New York State of Mind. If you believe Miss Martinez has exceptional potential, that carries considerable weight. As the evening continues, other guests are drawn into musical conversations that might never have occurred in a typical hotel bar setting. A jazz musician from Detroit shares stories about the clubs where he learned to play. A classical violinist from the Chicago Symphony offers insights about the challenges of making a career in music. A music teacher from Milwaukee talks about the importance of supporting young artists who are willing to take creative risks. Margaret watches these interactions with deep satisfaction, seeing in them the fulfillment of her vision of hospitality as the creation of meaningful human connections. The hotel bar has become a temporary community of strangers united by shared appreciation for music and artistry. Even Sterling begins to understand that something commercially valuable is occurring. The bar's revenue has increased significantly as guests linger longer, order more drinks, and several have extended their hotel stays specifically to participate in the musical atmosphere that has developed around Sarah's performances. But beyond immediate financial considerations, Sterling observes that guest satisfaction scores are likely to improve dramatically based on the enthusiastic comments he's overhearing. The hotel is creating the kind of memorable experience that generates positive reviews, word-of-mouth recommendations, and return customers. As the evening draws toward a close, Billy makes an announcement that surprises everyone, including himself. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite anyone who's interested to join Sarah and me for an impromptu songwriting session. Nothing formal, just an exploration of how music brings people together. The response is immediate and enthusiastic. Professor Hartford moves closer to the piano. The jazz musician from Detroit produces a small harmonica from his pocket, and the classical violinist asks if she can retrieve her instrument from her room. What develops over the next hour is unlike anything any of them have experienced. Billy and Sarah begin with a simple chord progression, and others contribute melodic ideas, rhythmic suggestions, and lyrical fragments. The resulting composition emerges organically from the collective creativity of strangers who have discovered they share a common language of musical expression. Margaret participates by offering occasional observations about the emotional atmosphere in the room, helping the musicians understand how their collaborative creation is affecting listeners who lack technical musical knowledge but possess genuine appreciation for artistry. Sterling watches from the periphery, beginning to understand that he is witnessing something that transcends normal business categories. This isn't entertainment or customer service in any conventional sense, but rather the creation of authentic community through shared creative experience. The collaborative composition that emerges tells the story of strangers meeting unexpectedly and discovering connections that transcend their different backgrounds and destinations. The lyrics speak about the courage required to share something personal with people you may never see again, and the magic that occurs when that courage is met with genuine appreciation and understanding. As the impromptu songwriting session concludes, there's a moment of perfect silence in the bar. Everyone present seems to recognize that they have participated in something rare and valuable, the creation of art through spontaneous collaboration among people who had been strangers just hours earlier. Billy looks around at faces that reflect various combinations of joy, surprise, and gratitude. "This is why music matters," he says quietly. "Not because it's entertaining or profitable, though it can be both of those things, but because it reminds us that we're capable of creating beauty together, even when we come from completely different places and are heading in completely different directions." Professor Hartford nods thoughtfully. Music has always been humanity's most universal language. Tonight proved that even strangers can speak it fluently when they're willing to listen to each other. Sarah sits at the piano, overwhelmed by the evening's developments. In the space of 2 days, her artistic expression has gone from being discouraged and constrained to being celebrated and expanded through collaboration with musicians whose talent and experience far exceed her own. But more than professional validation, she has experienced the profound satisfaction of using her music to bring people together in meaningful ways. The hotel bar has become a temporary sanctuary where strangers have shared something essential about human creativity and connection. As guests begin to disperse, many exchange contact information and make plans to stay in touch. The jazz musician invites Sarah to sit in with his group when she visits Detroit. Professor Hartford offers to discuss graduate school opportunities. The classical violinist suggests collaborating on compositions that blend popular and classical elements. Margaret coordinates these connections with the pride of a hostess whose gathering has exceeded everyone's expectations. She understands that the evening's success stems not from elaborate planning or expensive amenities, but from creating an atmosphere where people feel safe to share their authentic selves with strangers. Sterling approaches Billy as the evening winds down, his expression thoughtful rather than merely diplomatic. "Mr. Joel, I owe you a more substantial apology than I offered earlier. I was wrong about what our guests value and wrong about what makes hospitality excellent rather than merely adequate." Billy studies Sterling's face, looking for signs that this acknowledgement represents genuine learning rather than calculated corporate positioning. "Mr. Sterling, the measure of that apology will be in how you support people like Sarah and Mrs. Chen going forward. They understand that hospitality is about recognizing the humanity in every guest and creating opportunities for meaningful experiences. I'm beginning to understand that myself. Tonight's success wasn't accidental, was it? It required people who believe that their work can be more than just job performance." Billy nods approvingly. "Exactly. Sarah's music created the foundation, but Mrs. Chen's warmth made people feel welcome to participate, and your willingness to step back and let something organic develop allowed it to flourish. That's hospitality as an art form." As Billy prepares to leave for his room, Sarah approaches with a mixture of gratitude and determination in her expression. "Mr. Joel, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. The encouragement, the financial support, the professional connections, it's more than I ever dreamed possible." "Sarah, you don't need to thank me. Just keep writing music and trust that what you have to say matters. The world needs more people willing to put beauty into it, and you're clearly one of those people." Billy pauses, then adds something that surprises him with its spontaneity. "I have a small recording studio in New York, and I'm always looking for talented songwriters to collaborate with. If you're ever interested in exploring what we could create together, please don't hesitate to reach out." Sarah's eyes widen with amazement. The offer represents possibilities beyond anything she had allowed herself to imagine, but more importantly, it represents recognition from a musician whose artistry has shaped American popular music for decades. "I would be honored, Mr. Joel, more honored than I can express." Margaret approaches as their conversation concludes, carrying herself with renewed confidence and purpose. The evening's success has reminded her why she chose hospitality as a career and reinforced her belief that exceptional service stems from genuine care for guest experiences rather than rigid adherence to corporate policies. Mr. Joel, I wanted you to know that tonight felt like the culmination of everything I've spent 30 years trying to achieve in this industry. Watching strangers become friends through shared appreciation for music. That's hospitality at its finest. Billy takes Margaret's hand in both of his, a gesture that conveys respect and appreciation for her dedication to serving others. Mrs. Chen, people like you are the reason some hotels become places people remember for the rest of their lives. Don't ever doubt that your work matters or that your approach to serving others creates real value in the world. As Billy finally heads to his room, the hotel bar slowly returns to its normal configuration, but the atmosphere remains transformed. Staff members clean tables and arrange chairs with unusual care, as if preserving the memory of something special that occurred in this ordinary commercial space. Sterling remains in the bar long after the guests have departed, sitting alone at a corner table and reflecting on the evening's lessons. His entire approach to hotel management has been based on controlling variables to ensure predictable outcomes. But the night's most successful moments had emerged from allowing uncertainty and spontaneity to flourish. He thinks about the corporate letter waiting on his desk and realizes that his response will need to acknowledge not just tactical mistakes in handling Billy Joel's presence, but fundamental misunderstandings about what creates lasting guest loyalty and satisfaction. The next morning arrives with bright sunshine that transforms Lake Michigan into a canvas of blue and silver. Billy prepares to continue his journey to Milwaukee, but he carries with him memories of an evening that reminded him why he chose music as a career and why human connections matter more than professional achievements. He stops at the front desk to check out, where Margaret greets him with the same warm professionalism she had shown upon his arrival, but now enhanced by genuine friendship and mutual respect. Mr. Joel, I hope your stay exceeded your expectations. Mrs. Chen, it exceeded my hopes. Sometimes travel can be isolating, but this visit reminded me that strangers can become friends when they're willing to share something meaningful with each other. As Billy completes his checkout process, Sarah appears in the lobby. Having arrived early for a meeting Sterling has scheduled to discuss expanding her role at the hotel. Her face glows with excitement about the possibilities that have opened in her life, but also with gratitude for the kindness that made those possibilities available. Mr. Joel, I wanted to catch you before you left. Last night, it changed everything for me, not just professionally, but personally. You showed me that taking creative risks can lead to connections I never imagined possible. Billy smiles warmly, recognizing in Sarah's expression the same excitement he had felt decades earlier when his own musical career began to develop momentum. Sarah, remember that the risks you took were musical risks, sharing your authentic voice rather than just playing what you thought people wanted to hear. That authenticity is what created the connections, not any magic I brought to the situation. Sterling appears in the lobby, moving with less rigid formality than had characterized his previous interactions. The corporate pressure and guest feedback have forced him to reconsider his management philosophy, but the evening's success has also shown him possibilities he hadn't previously recognized. Mr. Joel, I wanted to personally ensure your departure experience meets our highest standards, and I wanted you to know that we're implementing changes to better support the kind of exceptional guest experiences you helped create last evening. Billy shakes Sterling's hand, noting the difference in the manager's demeanor. Mr. Sterling, the real test will be whether those changes persist after the immediate pressure subsides. Excellence in hospitality requires daily commitment to values, not just crisis management. I understand that now. Mrs. Chen and Miss Martinez have helped me realize that policies should support exceptional service, not constrain it. As Billy loads his luggage into his car, he takes a final look at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. From the outside, it appears identical to dozens of similar establishments he has patronized over the years, but he now understands that buildings are merely containers. What makes them special is the people inside who choose to treat strangers with genuine care and respect. He drives away carrying memories of Margaret's kindness, Sarah's courage in sharing her musical gifts, and even Sterling's willingness to learn from his mistakes. But most significantly, he carries the memory of an evening when music created connections between strangers that transcended their different backgrounds and destinations. 3 months later, Billy receives a letter forwarded from his management company. It comes from Sarah Martinez, postmarked from New York City, where she has relocated to pursue the graduate studies Professor Hartford helped her arrange at Juilliard. Dear Billy, the letter begins, I wanted you to know that the evening we shared at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel has continued to influence my life in ways I'm still discovering. The courage you showed me that night, to trust that authentic expression would find appreciation, has guided every decision I've made since then. She describes her progress at Juilliard, where her compositions have attracted attention from faculty members who appreciate her unique blend of classical training and popular music sensibilities. She has begun performing her original works at small venues around Manhattan, building an audience of listeners who appreciate music that engages their emotions rather than simply providing background ambiance. But beyond professional developments, her letter continues, I wanted to thank you for teaching me that kindness extended to strangers can create ripples that reach far beyond what we can imagine. I try every day to pass that lesson forward by treating the people I encounter with the same generosity you showed me. Billy files the letter in a special folder where he keeps correspondence from people whose lives have intersected with his in meaningful ways. Sarah's words remind him that the evening at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel had been exceptional, not because of celebrity involvement, but because several people had chosen to treat each other with genuine kindness and respect. Margaret Chen also writes to Billy, though her letter arrives through the hotel's corporate channels rather than his personal management. She reports that the changes implemented following his visit have transformed the hotel's guest satisfaction ratings and staff morale. Mr. Sterling has proven capable of learning and growth, she writes, though I suspect his evolution stems more from practical considerations than philosophical revelation. Regardless of his motivations, the hotel has become a place where both guests and staff feel valued as individuals rather than processed as transactions. She describes how Sarah's expanded musical role had attracted positive attention from local media and music critics, generating the kind of publicity that brings new customers and reinforces the hotel's reputation for offering unique experiences rather than standardized service. Most importantly, Margaret's letter concludes, I wanted you to know that your kindness to an aging hotel employee reminded me that hospitality work can be a form of ministry, an opportunity to make strangers feel welcomed and valued during moments when they're far from home and familiar comforts. Billy reflects on both letters while sitting in his Long Island home studio, where he continues to write songs that attempt to capture universal human experiences in ways that help listeners feel less alone in the world. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel experience has provided him with material for several new compositions, but more importantly, it has reinforced his belief that music's greatest value lies in its ability to create connections between people who might otherwise remain strangers. 6 months after the Chicago encounter, Billy receives an unexpected phone call from Sterling, who has been promoted to regional management within the hotel corporation based on the improved performance metrics at the Grand Metropolitan. Mr. Joel, I wanted to personally invite you to return to Chicago for the hotel's celebration of our new entertainment program. Sarah Martinez will be featured as our signature artist, performing original compositions alongside carefully selected standards. Sterling's voice carries genuine enthusiasm rather than the calculated promotional tone Billy might have expected. More importantly, I wanted you to know that the lessons learned during your visit have influenced policy changes throughout our hotel chain. We're training managers to recognize that exceptional hospitality requires supporting staff members who understand service as more than transaction processing. Billy accepts the invitation, curious to observe how the evening's lessons have evolved into sustainable business practices. When he returns to the Grand Metropolitan 6 months later, he finds a subtly but significantly transformed establishment. The lobby maintains its elegant appointments, but the atmosphere feels warmer and more welcoming. Staff members engage with guests more personally, and there's an energy that suggests people enjoy their work rather than simply performing required duties. Margaret greets him at the front desk with genuine joy, her manner reflecting increased confidence and authority. "Mr. Joel, welcome back to the Grand Metropolitan. I think you'll find that we've learned to balance efficiency with hospitality excellence." Sterling appears shortly afterward, his demeanor showing continued evolution toward genuine appreciation for the human dimensions of hotel management. "Mr. Joel, thank you for accepting our invitation. Tonight's celebration represents everything we've learned about creating memorable guest experiences. But the evening's real revelation occurs in the hotel bar, where Sarah performs with the confidence and artistry of someone who has discovered her authentic voice and learned to trust its value. Her original compositions have matured through professional training and consistent performance, but they retain the emotional honesty that had originally attracted Billy's attention. The audience includes hotel guests, local music lovers, and industry professionals who have begun to recognize Sarah as a distinctive voice in contemporary songwriting. But more significantly, the atmosphere reflects the kind of genuine community that can develop when commercial spaces are managed by people who understand hospitality as an art rather than merely a business process. During an intermission, Billy joins Sarah at the piano for an impromptu collaboration that evolves into the same kind of spontaneous musical community that had made their first meeting so memorable. Guests contribute ideas, share stories, and create temporary but meaningful connections through shared appreciation for music and artistry. Margaret watches from her position near the bar entrance, seeing in the evening's success the fulfillment of her career-long vision of hospitality as service that honors the dignity and potential of every person who enters the establishment. Sterling observes from across the room, recognizing that the financial success generated by this approach to hotel management stems from understanding that authentic experiences create customer loyalty and positive reputation more effectively than cost-cutting and policy enforcement. As the evening concludes, Billy addresses the gathered crowd with words that summarize everything he has learned from his encounters with the people of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. Music has the power to remind us that we're all connected by our shared humanity, regardless of where we come from or where we're headed. But music alone isn't enough. It requires people willing to create spaces where strangers feel safe to share something authentic with each other. He looks around the room at faces that reflect various combinations of joy, gratitude, and recognition. Tonight happened because Margaret Chen understands that hospitality means treating every guest like family. Because Sarah Martinez has the courage to share her authentic artistic voice. Because Robert Sterling learned that excellent business results from supporting people rather than constraining them. Billy pauses, then offers the evening's final lesson. The kindness you extend to strangers creates ripples you may never see, but that continue to influence the world long after the moment has passed. Never underestimate the power of treating someone with genuine respect and care. As guests begin to disperse, many carrying memories that will influence how they treat strangers in their own lives, Billy reflects on the profound truth that small acts of kindness and recognition can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. Margaret approaches as he prepares to leave, her expression carrying the satisfaction of someone whose work has created lasting positive change. Mr. Joel, thank you for teaching us that hospitality excellence requires recognizing the dignity and potential in every person we encounter. Sarah joins them, her face glowing with the confidence of someone who has discovered her authentic voice and learned to trust its value. Billy, I can never adequately thank you for showing me that taking creative risks can lead to connections I never imagined possible. Sterling concludes their gathering with words that surprise everyone, including himself, with their genuine humility. Mr. Joel, you taught me that managing people requires understanding what motivates them to do their best work, not just enforcing policies that ensure minimum compliance. As Billy drives away from the Grand Metropolitan Hotel for the second time, he carries with him renewed faith in humanity's capacity for growth, kindness, and connection. The building disappears from his rearview mirror, but the memories of the people inside and the lessons they taught him about treating strangers with dignity and respect remain vivid and influential. Years later, when interviewers ask Billy Joel about the most meaningful experiences of his career, he often mentions a hotel in Chicago where he learned that fame and success matter far less than the willingness to recognize and nurture the potential in every person you encounter. The people you help may change your life in ways you never expect, he concludes. But more importantly, the kindness you show to strangers creates ripples that continue long after the moment has passed, influencing lives and communities in ways you may never fully understand, but that make the world a more connected and compassionate place. Never underestimate the power of a kind heart to transform not just individual lives, but entire communities through the simple recognition that every stranger deserves to be treated with dignity, respect, and genuine care. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your own experiences with unexpected kindness in the comments below. Sometimes a simple act of recognition can change someone's entire life.